Show here on the Fox Den on the Fox D Network. I'm your host, Heath Douglas, and on today's show here, we have with us a really great man who is a veteran of the Vietnam War. He's also written a book called A Week in Vietnam about what 85% of Vietnam veterans who never saw combat experienced. And outside of his illustrious career, he has been a wonderful husband, a man of great experience and exposure. Please welcome to the show, everybody, William Michael Murray. William, thanks so much for being on the show.
I actually go by Michael, but that's fine.
Okay, sure. No worries. So there's definitely a lot to get into with your backstory, how you got enlisted in the military. You got shipped to Vietnam in a kind of interesting roundabout way. You got into law, was put in some very interesting and albeit varied assignments, and afterwards managed to somehow find time to write a book that could very well be its own interesting side of the Vietnam War that we never knew. But before we get into all that, we just want to highlight our sponsor, and that, of course, is this network's own coin, the Fox D Coin. The Fox D Coin is a totally community-driven coin with no pre-mine and no developer's wallet that is keeping the coin held behind a paywall. Fox D is a 100% transparent coin that's open to anybody and everybody, making it a coin for the people and by the people. The unique advantage that Fox D offers is what we're utilizing right now, and that is, of course, is the Fox D Network. The coin gives everybody the opportunity to get seen on our network and gives your content a chance to shine, with you being able to grow with your audience as well as network. We're always accepting new guest streamers and contributors to the network. So if you want to be able to expand your brand, you know what to do. Check us out on our website at foxdnetwork.com. That is fox_dnetwork.com. Or you can always support the coin as well at Fox D Coin. That is fox_dcoin.com. Or you can download your own wallet. Or if you want to buy some coins yourself, you can check us out on Crex24, BitSales, FX, and Free Exchange. So, starting off, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your humble beginnings, where you come from, and what got you enlisted into the military, and what your experience was like going to Vietnam and kind of the height of it all.
Well, I needed a scholarship to go to college. And so the Navy agreed to give me a scholarship to go to Tulane University in exchange for giving them 4 years when I graduated from college. Mm-hmm. And I'm a supply officer. So I went to Supply Corps School for 6 months in Athens, Georgia. And then I got sent to Guam. And I had a really great job on Guam. I worked at a shipyard. And at the end of that time, they ordered me to another command on Guam, which was a squadron of patrol gunboats. And these patrol gunboats were still actively engaged in Vietnam, even though the Navy had pretty much pulled out, except for this one squadron of ships. The Navy had a big base at Cam Ranh Bay, and they shut down the base at Cam Ranh Bay and moved all of our ships down to a town called Vung Tau, which was a very interesting city in and of itself. But they were having logistics problems, so I volunteered to go into Vietnam and see if I could help them work out their logistic problems. So that's how I got sent to Vietnam. And they ordered me over there for a week because there were certain benefits from being there for a week. So I went to Vietnam for a week. The book tells about what I was able to accomplish, which really wasn't very much. And actually, I went back and volunteered to go back to Vietnam because that's what my job was, and got denied. And I probably am maybe the only guy you've ever met who actually volunteered to go to Vietnam and was turned down.
Wow.
So the week I spent in Vietnam was without a doubt the most bizarre week of my entire life. I mean, it was so incredibly strange. So anyway, I got out of the Navy and actually stayed in the reserves, but went back to law school, got a law degree. And about 3 years ago, I got sick and tired of practicing law. I had always wanted to write. And so I decided that my first book would be actually a second book, but the first book would be, this book would be about the week I spent in Vietnam because it was so bizarre. Most of it is based on experiences that I actually had in Vietnam. Now, there's some of this book which is based on stories I heard and stories I was told.
Mhm.
So I say that the book is fiction as opposed to being a memoir. But probably the best criticism I've gotten about the book was all from Vietnam vets who have read it and said, yeah, that's what it was like. That was what it was like, especially
Right.
for 85% of us who never went into combat. It was just bizarre. It was just strange.
Well, and I think that's one of those things when you hear about a lot of these stories like that, when people go to Vietnam, I think so many people automatically go, oh, you mean Full Metal Jacket? So you guys must have seen a lot of combat and all the airplanes and everything.
It was, as I say, only 15% of the people that went over there ever saw combat. The rest of us were, well, when I was in Saigon, that was where I officially was stationed initially when I went there.
Mm-hmm.
We were all walking around in Navy khaki uniforms, and we had desks, and we were doing. They could have picked up that office, moved it
Right.
anywhere in the world, and it would look like exactly the same thing. We weren't carrying weapons. It was just a day-to-day job, 7 days a week, but it was just a day-to-day job. So,
Right.
but I did get sent from Vietnam, from Saigon down to Vung Tau area, actually a base called Cat Lo, where the ships were coming in and getting resupplied. And it was also interesting that Cat Lo, at that time, this was what we call the Easter Tide Offensive, it was in 1972. And the ships that, one of the ships had been rocketed about the week before, missed the ship totally, but rocketed. So that whole area was under a yellow alert condition, which meant that you had to be on a base from dusk to dawn, military base, and there was one down there. So that's what I went down to do. It was an interesting week. So.
Well, and that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of get into deeply with your experience as well. When you did go to Vietnam, can you tell us maybe a story or two that, was maybe everyday normal as an occurrence in Vietnam, but maybe was something that was a culture shock to you when you got there?
Oh, there's so many of them. At the time that I got there, the military was pulling out of that area. The war was getting Vietnamized, as they called it. Mm-hmm. And so the problem was that nobody really cared. I mean, they just, people were pulling out, things were changing on a daily basis. But doing the job that I was sent to do was extremely difficult. But one story that comes to mind that kind of gives you an idea of what this was like was, in the office where I was working, the bathroom, or as we call it in the Navy, the head, was down a hallway, and over on the beside these, there were doors that opened in other offices, and they all had frosted glass over them, and then a logo painted on the frosted glass. And one of them I walked by every day was called Navy Psychological Warfare. And I went back, literally, I went back and I went, what do those guys do? And they said, we don't know. We don't know. We call them pigs and chickens because as far as we know, all they do is give pigs and chickens to the villagers. I was sitting at my desk one day and I was trying to write my report, which was kind of going to be an interesting report to say, I couldn't do anything. I mean, but anyway, so this guy from Pigs and Chickens comes walking in and walks over to my desk and sits down to talk. Never met him before in my life. And we were all just in Navy khaki uniforms. Well, he had on what we call jungle silks, which were black and gray kind of nylon fabric. The pattern was kind of lightning bolts. And besides wearing this uniform, he also had a pistol quick draw strapped to his leg.
Wow.
And talking to this guy, I'm sure you've experienced these things where you're talking about one thing and then all of a sudden he shifts and goes off on something else.
Right.
I liken it to gears. You know, there's two gears and there's a tooth missing and it shifts and he's off on something. All right. As I'm talking to this guy, and this is absolutely true, as I'm talking to this guy, suddenly a squirrel crawls out of one of the pockets on his, climbs up and sits on his shoulder. And he reaches in his other pocket and pulls out a nut and hands it, not missing a beat, hands it to the squirrel. I am talking to a nut who has a squirrel on his shoulder who is eating a nut. I mean, this whole time I'm sitting there thinking, oh, he was on a back-to-back tour, so he had been there 18 months, and I was sitting there, you know, a couple of years back in the States, you know, Hawaii, San Diego, Pensacola. You might want to, you know, see if you can.
Right.
I'm sure I had one of these aghast looks on my face, and he suddenly stops and he goes, now of all the questions I had in mind, this wasn't one of them, but he goes, oh, he lives in there, pointing to the pocket. Seriously. But in terms of the job I was supposed to do, the Army was supposed to be supporting us, and they were pulling out. And I had heard about these guys working in doing black market stuff. So I went over to meet the first sergeant in charge of it. I walked in and kind of surprised him and could tell that he was doing black market stuff. Offered me a fifth of very good scotch on the house, knowing full well I was about to be bribed. And finally he said, I don't have the people to support you guys. I really don't. So I figured out this way that we could use our guys to help him, which I didn't think was very legal. And so I got back trying to write this report saying this is what I did without saying what I did, because what I did was probably illegal. And I was trying to write a report that didn't put me on report. So, right. And that's what it was like. I mean, that's what it was. The first day I arrived down there, it was sunset. So I was supposed to be back on a base right then.
Right.
And nobody was there. Nobody was there to pick me up. And yes, exactly. I was in Vung Tau, Vietnam, standing there going, I wonder if there's a Holiday Inn around here. I mean, you know, so I luckily had the phone number for the detachment of our guys that were over there. And so I found a phone and I called them, and this guy just said, we're sorry, Miss Murray, they don't tell us anything. We'll come get you immediately. So he comes in a little while, comes, picks me up, Hayes Gray Navy truck, and we're driving down the road to this base where the military was down there. And suddenly he slowly pulls off the road, and there was an M16 and a shotgun between the seats. And he looks at me and he says, Mr. Murray, do you know how to use these things? And I said, yeah, I've been checked out on small arms. Why? I mean, you know. Right, kind of curious. Well, yeah, exactly. Why would you want to know? He said, well, this village we're coming up to belongs to Charlie, which was the Vietnamese. And he said, they've been attacking at sunset, and so we may have to fight our way through. Yeah, exactly. I am here to tell you there are no words in the English language that will not focus your thought process quicker than we have to fight our way through. I'm going, wait a minute. I wasn't standing here for this. I mean, right. So is there a way around this? And he said, no, sir, we got to go through. So I reached over and picked up the M16 and stuck the barrel out the window. I said, all right, let's go. And first, I was amazed at how calm I was. I mean, given the circumstances, because I really was very calm. But the second thing was my sense of humor kicked in and said, well, you're finally riding shotgun. And it was, as I say, it was the longest 3 or 4 minutes of my entire life because it was dark. I mean, the jungle was black. It was black. I couldn't see anybody, and I saw no males in the village. There were women there. There were children, but I saw no males. So if we were going to get fired on, they were going to get firing from the jungle, and I wouldn't be able to see them. Anyway, we got back, and it was fine. So that's just I'm really a storyteller, by the way. I
love it. I love it.
I'm really not a really good novelist, but all my favorite writers are the same thing. They're great storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
They tell stories, and loosely there is a storyline that runs between them, and that's really what. So this is a series of stories and events, most of them being true. The first night I arrived, I was in a bunking with one of the officers in his room, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, there was this large explosion, just window shattering.
Wow.
And he gets up and he turns over and goes back to sleep. And I'm going, what? Wait, grab a weapon. We're under attack,
Right.
And of course, all these World War II movie things went through my head. Luckily, I disregarded them. And I finally just said, are you concerned about that explosion? He said, no. He said, if the Vietnamese women who cleaned the place don't show up, we'll be under attack. But he said, they all showed up today, so this isn't an attack. And of course, I'm going, what if they just surprised you this time?
Right.
An explosion is normally indicative of an attack.
Yes.
And I thought, well, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. This guy seems to be okay with this, so maybe I shouldn't worry about that. But that was the first day I arrived. Anyway, so the book is a series of incidents like that,
mm-hmm.
that all happened within that week I was there. Just a very strange week.
Well, I was about to say, I mean, making that your first day, your first week, I mean, talk about not getting a nice little mint chocolate and some pillows, and we'll pick you up with a wreath to put around your neck.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Now, in terms of being there and going through the experience in Vietnam, what would you say was probably some of the more difficult times that you probably had, or what was some of the roughest parts of when you were there in Vietnam?
I guess, seriously, now you've got to understand that I wasn't looking at combat. I was sent there to do a job, and the job was important. The ships that I was attached to were having trouble getting spare parts, food, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, I figured, well, I'll go over there and make a few contacts, make a few phone calls, get this thing straightened out. And I couldn't. The Army was pulling out. And basically the guy I was talking with said, I just don't have the personnel to help you. So, so that's basically what I ended up doing. But it was this frustration of not being able to accomplish things. And people were doing their jobs there, which
Mhm.
I've always been impressed by the military. Notwithstanding, we knew how much we were being lied to. We
Right.
knew, most of us knew that this thing was a disaster and we needed to get out of it. But every day the military got up and went and did the jobs they were sent to do. And that's always
Yeah.
impressed me about our military. Always impressed me.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that's one of the things from your standpoint as well. You mentioned a good point. You know, the Vietnam War winding down. I mean, we know this now, obviously in hindsight, but you know, the Vietnam War winding down at that time. What was even like the culture like amongst a lot of you guys with, you know, knowing, like you said, that this was like, hey, we got in this for the wrong reasons, or well, this is not going to go. What was even the culture like amongst a lot of you guys?
Well, let's see. I can best explain that. I was back on Guam at the Officers Club one night.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was 72, 73. And having drinks with a lot, all the other officers there were still assigned to these ships and we're still going to Vietnam. And we got into a conversation about McGovern versus Nixon. You remember that period of time? And both of them said they were going to get out of the war. Well,
Yep.
the conversation was who can get us out quicker. That was not Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. It was who can get us out of this mess quicker.
Yes.
And you know, it was very, very good conversation. I mean, people had good points on both sides. There was no rancor. It was just, we all know this is a mistake. Who can get us out of this? But the next day, we all went back and did our jobs, and they knew they would be going back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
and could still potentially get killed. Now,
well, it is a war. I mean, it's not like we're throwing roses around.
Exactly. Now, of the millions of people that went there, I say most of them were not killed. Some of them were wounded, but the casualties, given the number of people there, was relatively small. But still, you know, when somebody pulls off the road and says, we may have to fight our way through, it reminds you it's a combat zone.
Yes.
You know? But we're in the military. That's what we're paid to do.
No, exactly. And you know, when one thing about, and I'm the same way with you, I admire a lot of these military members because, at least for me, being a millennial, I grew up with, you know, the Iraq and Afghan war veterans. That, you know, it's the same thing. Is they're like, man, this whole thing with Saddam Hussein, this is getting dragged out a lot longer than it should have, blah, blah. But you're right. They still go in there. They're like, nope, we're going to Al-Hadin next week and we're going to take out, you know, a group of Taliban and we're just doing our job.
Yep, exactly. And you may not want to do it. You may not like it, but you still go do your job.
No, exactly.
By the way, the thing about the stuff that you see is it's bizarre, and much of it is humorous. And if you lose your sense of humor, you're a dead man. I mean, your sense of humor is what gets you through. So that, and hopefully there's people waiting for you to come back alive that are in love with you. So you think of them often.
The writing home, the letters. Well, of course, now it's more email, internet, like what we're doing, but same difference, you know, just different generation.
Sure, exactly.
Now, kind of going to your book is, I want to talk about that too. So, talk us through what inspired you to write it. Kind of what can people expect to read when they get into it, and just tell us like everything that you can about the book and what made you do it.
Okay, all right. Well, first, it's a great story. It's a great story. And I have read scores of books on Vietnam. I've also read Halberstam's Best and Brightest and Karnow's History of Vietnam. As far as I know, there's never been a book that's really talked about what the 85% of the people that were not in combat were doing over there. And it's humorous. It's funny. And it's funny because it's bizarre. I mean, it's
Right.
just,
Oh yeah.
it's just funny. So when I decided to get out of the practice of law, which was an easy decision because I got to the point where I hated it, and I'd always wanted to write, I
Right.
thought, okay, well, you have this great story. You ought to tell this great story. And it's interesting too. Women have read the book, go, well, first, most people are amazed that only 15% of the people over there were ever in combat. I mean,
Right.
they're astounded. They thought everybody was over there in combat, and they weren't. And the women there said, well, this is interesting. I mean, what you are actually doing over there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, most of it was just a day-to-day job. You were doing
Yeah.
a day-to-day job. You know, in the back of your mind, you realize you got to be a little more careful.
Right.
Because the results of screwing up can be more than getting fired. Yeah, a lot more than getting fired.
No, exactly.
So
Well,
I decided to write that book. I decided, okay, you've thought about this for years. It's time for you to sit down and write the book. And it is still so much of it is so clear in my memory. One night I was at an event where there was a World War II soldier that had just written a book about Guadalcanal. And I walked up to have him autograph it. And I said, do you remember all of that? He said, like it was yesterday. And I said, I know it. And I said, this was Vietnam 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I said, I do remember things. So I really decided, okay, I need to tell this story, want to tell this story, and I want to do it while I can still remember it because I'm getting old enough that I don't remember things as well, but I remember.
Right.
But I remember.
It's got like your own little journal in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, the best compliment I get is from the Vietnam vets who have read it and just say, yeah, that's what it was like. That was it. So
right.
The only book I can think of would be similar, would be like Catch-22 about World War II, but it wasn't. It was about, exactly. So, and it has the same degree and amount of humor that was in Catch-22. So.
Well, and you do write, like you said, your book with a lot of humor and a lot of the, I don't want to say slapstick for lack of a better term, but you're right. You talk about the kind of more comedic side. What made you want to write in more about the funny side of it and not so much like so many of these other Vietnam books that do talk about the nitty, the gritty, the blood, the guts, what made you want to write more on the comedic side about it?
It was not so much writing about the humorous side. It was writing about the bizarre.
Right.
And the bizarre itself is humorous. That's where the humor comes in. And I wanted to write that because that's true. That's the way it was. I had a lengthy conversation recently of a good friend who's been a year in Vietnam, and he and I were talking about the same thing, that so much of it was so bizarre. And when you step back, it's funny. I mean, it's humorous. So that's about the best way I can answer that question.
No, you're good. No, and you're right, because there's a lot of that stuff where when it just gets so bad, all you can do is laugh. That's kind of what keeps your sanity grounded enough to where, you're not constantly thinking about all the bad times. Your brain's trying to grasp onto that one little bit of, okay, now I can laugh at this point, because it does help you keep going on.
Yeah. When I spent the first night on a compound, and I just had a mattress, springs, there was a ceiling fan. When I turned the ceiling fan on, it blew the mosquitoes off. When I turned it off, the sand came up. But anyway, the next day I moved on to one of our ships, which was much better. accommodations. But all night long, there was a pier there, and there was a sentry on the pier. And the Vietnamese would swim up to ships at night, put a bomb on them, and swim away and blow up the ships. So the sentries periodically all night were throwing hand grenades, percussion grenades in the water just randomly.
Wow.
Well, when it would go off, there would be a whoomp sound and then a bang as the wave from it would hit the ships. So all night long, I'd hear the whoomp and the bang as it would hit the ship. And of course, I'd come up out of the bed and slam my head against the overhead. And I'm going, this is Three Stooges stuff. This is ridiculous, but that's the way it was. That's actually the way it was. Yeah. So, anyway.
Oh, that's great. Well, now in terms of even also with the book, how much of the book is your own personal experience versus some of it, like you talked about, may actually be a little bit exaggerated for changing names and places?
Over 80% is actual things that I really experienced. And
wow, that's cool.
I wrote them truthfully.
Right.
One of the women who wrote it, I actually wrote about going into one of the Vietnamese brothels, and the guy was with. I mean, we just went in and had a couple of drinks and left. But they sort of found that offensive, and I was going, wait a minute. Any combat zone, any war in America, there are brothels. Anywhere. So, this is the way it was. It's true. This is true, and I will tell the truth as opposed to trying to hedge it. And by the way, there's another one. As if you go into one of these places, the girls come up and chat you up. The one that came up to chatted me up was probably early 20s and probably about 8 months pregnant.
What? Oh my gosh.
Seriously, that's serious.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, it's funny, but it's also bizarre.
Yes. Well, seriously, you probably, this is why reading through even the description of your book, I honestly was like, this has to be a Netflix thing. We've got to make this a 10 little mini series thing because there's so much involved in it. I'm like, you could do an entire episode each week, do 12 episodes, and it'd probably be the highest grossing one of all time.
Oh, yeah. No, everybody that the people that I know that are literary have all said, this would make a great movie. And I think so too. I agree. So,
oh yeah.
I'd love it if Netflix would pick it up. But
well, it's a thought. It's something, right?
Yeah. So
now, also with your book itself, do you have any other works going on? Is there like maybe a second Vietnam book coming out? Do you maybe have like some other sort of, fictional things that like, I've got a Vietnam series coming out or something else going on in the background?
Well, I have finished the book, which is a sequel to this one, which picks up the protagonist as he's getting out of the Navy. Mm-hmm. He's in California. He processes out in San Francisco. He finds himself with about 3 weeks before he has to be back in Texas and start a job. Mm-hmm. And he shipped a 240Z, a little sports car, back from Guam. And he decides that he's going to use the time to visit the national parks in California. And so that whole book is about that trip that he takes.
Oh, cool.
And if you remember, if you're old enough to remember the old Route 66 series, it's very, very reminiscent of that. In fact, he actually drives on the old Route 66, but he goes from, it really starts in Reno and goes from Reno to Tahoe and Tahoe to Yosemite and then Sequoia and ends up on the Navajo reservation visiting a high school friend. And his problem is he's supposed to be a lawyer, and he's supposed to go back to law school, but he's after Vietnam, he's not sure he wants to do that.
Right.
So he's driving along, and he's personified two characters, and you can almost imagine that one that he calls the nerd, and the nerd says, no, you got this plan, you got to stay on this plan, what are you going to do? The other one he calls the siren, who is female, and she goes, you need to take time off. You need to go do something else. What do you're not sure you want to do this. So the whole time he's driving along, he's listening to the argument between these two people. But again, it's about the adventures he has and the experiences he has. And one of the things that I really wanted to write about in that book was what it was actually like in 1973 in America.
Oh, cool.
Who the hippies are, what they were doing. He picks up a hitchhiker, and he asks them, I don't know if you remember, you probably didn't know it, but July 4th weekend, probably 72, there were a bunch of hippies in Yosemite in this grassy area. And the park rangers and police came literally riding in, swinging clubs, beating up on people.
Wow.
And it turns out that a young guy whose mother was a videographer he happened to be there with a camera for that weekend and videoed the whole thing.
Wow.
And by the way, as a result, the head of the Park Service was fired. I mean, but most people don't remember that. Most people don't, if they ever knew about it, don't remember it. So it talks a lot about what the country was like during that period of time. And that's what I wanted to write about then. And especially, he keeps going, people go, what are you doing? And they always ask, did you go to Vietnam? And
right.
So he responds, yes. And then, of course, they want to know about Vietnam. And my favorite quote from the book is, the next time I bear arms against the North Vietnamese, they better be coming across the Rio Grande and burning farms, because I'm not one.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, and it sounds like it's like a little time capsule almost, because you talk about with it being more about the American side of it, what America went through, is it shows more of how, okay, this is what really happened in the 70s. It's not some caricature of, well, it's, Hollywood's interpretation of it.
Yeah, no, I tried to write it as truthfully as I possibly could. One of the nice things, I don't really have to make money writing. I do it because I love it. I really enjoy it. I enjoy writing. So I have the ability to write truthfully. I don't have to change it. I don't have to. I'm sure if they ever make a movie out of it, the screenwriters will change it a lot. But right now, this is as truthful as I can make it.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be an amazing book when you get it published, you get it out there. And I mean, definitely, I would love to, be able to get my hands on it and all that. But overall, sir, again, Mr. Murray, thank you so much for being on the show. It has been an amazing pleasure. And, thank you for your service as well, being in the military and all that, and, serving our country. You've done a wonderful job being an author, being a service member, and just everything in between.
Thank you. I'm only slightly blushing because a lot of it I really, really enjoyed. And it's especially when I got back from Vietnam, and I actually started law school, and at that point I was angry with the Navy, and I got a call, but I was having to put myself through law school.
Right.
And I got a call from a Navy Reserve recruiter who said, "You want to go back on active reserves?" And I went, I don't think so. And he said, "It'll pay you $400 for 1 weekend a month." And I went, "Where do I sign?"
Right? Like, well, money talks. So
Yeah, exactly. And I literally said, I will stay in until it's, first out of law school. And then I said, okay, I'll stay in as long as, when it's not fun anymore, I'll get out. And
right.
it was interesting and fun. And I spent another 22 years in the reserves before I retired out of the reserves. And it really had a good time. I really, really enjoyed it and had some really, really interesting projects. So I have no regrets about my relationship with the military, even though
that's awesome. That's really awesome. Well, and we'll definitely have all the links so people can check out your website and check out the book as well, which has the link to the Amazon book. And again, like I said, sir, thank you so much for being on. And thank you folks for watching as well. Hopefully we will have you on next time. But other than that, hopefully you have a great, wonderful morning, noon, night, evening, or wherever you are in the world. Until next time, folks, take care.